With the holidays creeping up faster than that thing climbing your basement stairs, it's easy to succumb to that chilling weather and just let your facial hair grow. But trust me, no matter how busy you are fighting off the icy grip of cold, dead fingers, our friends at Manscaped have a simple solution. That's the Chairman Pro package. Their Chairman Pro electric razor is armed with not one, but two interchangeable skin-safe blade heads. And believe you me, with the skin-safe 4-blade foil and the skin-safe stubble trimmer, not to mention the Flex Adjust technology, your skin is safe from all kinds of things, not just the thing haunting your basement. But if you're still feeling scared, the Chairman Pro package comes with two holiday bonuses. Manscaped's Power Shave Gel and their Face Shave Soother, all packed with skin-soothing ingredients that hydrate your skin and protect against things like redness, irritation, ingrown hairs, basement demons, razor bumps. Whether you're looking for that perfect holiday gift for the man in your life or just for yourself, no shame, look no further than the Chairman Pro package. Go get yourself 20% off plus free shipping with the code PrettyDark at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code PrettyDark at manscaped.com. Thanks to Manscaped, nobody has to fear the holidays.
You're listening to That's Pretty Dark,
the podcast where we talk about all of the entertainment that scared us as children
and still haunts us as adults. So grab your flashlight and join us as we take a frightfully nostalgic look over our shoulders
and under our beds
and in our closets.
And together we'll realize, whoa, that's pretty dark.
Pretty dark.
So, what do you get when you toss small town nostalgia, horror, satire, sci-fi, and holiday cheer into a blender?
A blender.
You get a That's Pretty Dark December. And also Gremlins.
Is that you and me? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's us.
Just a couple of gremlins hanging out, recording podcasts.
And when you put all that together in a blender, it gets really gory really fast.
I have to say, of all the chaos we've created, we've conjured and concocted here together, doing this for now 3 years, it's never been quite as chaotic and messy as the Gremlins. Thank God.
True. This is maybe our messiest moment yet, where we're going tonight.
Gonna make a big old mess for you guys.
Yeah, I was really proud of that blender joke. I was like, yeah, that's the energy that I want to bring to this script.
That's a really delicious blended Christmas cocktail you just threw together.
Yeah, I thought so. I was proud. And then as I started researching, there was like an article from The Ringer, I think, and they made pretty much the exact same joke. And I was like, I have to tell people that I came up with it on my own before I read this article.
Accusing you of stealing.
It stole my thunder big time. I was pleased up until then. But
No. It's taking something that you love and repurposing it, like so many horror film franchises have done to the Gremlins.
Yes.
They've totally bastardized the concept and created their own version of the same.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of Gremlins is about making fun of horror cinema as well. It feeds into itself. The Ouroboros is back.
We're going to say this probably 100 times, but we were just saying literally moments before we hit record that this is technically a true horror film.
Yes.
Because once everything is established, once the monsters are unleashed, it becomes entirely about how many different ways can these little creatures cause chaos. It becomes about the kills, essentially.
Yeah, it's like, it feels almost like a slasher in every sense, because you're just waiting for the next like gag. You're waiting for the next moment.
We talked before about these concepts becoming so mature, so adult, so violent, and having to be simplified or distilled down.
There is a lot to be said about that this evening.
Yeah, it was too dark originally, and so it had to be
and we had to dial it back to pretty dark, and that's why it found its home here with us on That's Pretty Dark, where my name is Kaylin.
And my name is Christian, and this is one of my lifelong favorite movies. I love this movie.
I'm so glad that we're finally getting there and making it happen for you.
I've loved it for so long that when I was first watching it, it still scared me. Like I was that young, where I was still like terrifying to watch.
Yeah.
The music alone.
Hmm.
Dun, 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 dun,
And many
dun,
of you
dun,
may
dun,
feel that way
dun,
about
dun.
this movie. I'm sure most of you listening today, even if you haven't seen Gremlins, could recite at least a couple, if not all, of the 3 tenets of gremlin rearing.
Oh, yeah.
Avoid sunlight,
Mm-hmm.
don't get them wet,
Better not.
and don't let them eat after midnight.
That's the worst thing you can do.
Time zones be damned.
Get time zones and just the whole concept of time being literally created by human beings.
Yeah, don't worry about that part. For me, while I missed out on watching this as a kid, it was my oldest cousin, also a huge fan of E.T., who imparted this
Oh, yeah.
knowledge. Though his obsession with gremlins never quite transferred to me, the little creatures remain an 80s staple, and there is no doubt that our generation's pop culture picture of a gremlin was shaped by Spielberg's infamous dark comedy Gremlins, which premiered on June 8th, 1984, the same day as Ghostbusters, actually.
The same day?
The same day.
Damn.
And it is our reason for gathering here today.
I mean, 2 of the greatest movies of all time. I mean, how did one not totally trump the other one? Like, that's incredible.
Well, Gremlins came in second, I'll say that much.
Yeah, of
course.
course.
Still did really well.
Yeah. Amazing.
This was the heyday for 80s films, and Spielberg was involved in several huge blockbuster movies this same summer.
It was a good time. Yeah, Goonies just came out a year later.
Oh, yeah,
I
that's
mean,
true.
it's just wow.
Gremlins as an idea infiltrated the media zeitgeist throughout the 20th century in everything from The Twilight Zone to The Simpsons to Are You Afraid of the Dark and So Weird.
Little green
and
men.
This movie itself even spawned a sequel. But what shouldn't surprise you, Darklings, is that the notion of a gremlin was conceived much earlier, like at least 100 years ago, if not longer.
Oh, yeah.
And I would love to share some of the Gremlins' history with you. This was actually the most fun part of the whole thing for me.
This is the part I was most excited about.
I really enjoyed learning about this and figuring it out because I feel like I knew bits and pieces, and now I can kind of put the whole picture together.
Yeah.
Post-industrial revolution, humans and machines were in much closer contact than ever before. Planes, trains, and automobiles introduced incredible new conveniences and inconveniences.
Right.
During the early 20th century, mechanics and pilots among the Royal Air Force in Britain began to blame mechanical failures on small monsters inhabiting the planes, monsters that they called gremlins. Folklorist John W. Hazen states that some people believe the name derives from the Old English word gremain,
Okay.
meaning to vex.
Okay. All right.
And I like that. That makes sense.
Sure.
But another theory brought to light by Carol Rose in her book Spirits, Fairies, Leprechauns, and Goblins, an Encyclopedia,
Where's my copy?
attributes the name to a portmanteau of Grimm's fairy tales and a popular beverage of the time. She thinks it's plausible that the term is a blend of the word goblin with the name of the manufacturer of the most common beer available in the Royal Air Force in the 1920s. That beer was called Fremlin.
Oh, okay.
I feel like that checks out too. Both of these theories seem totally plausible to me.
Porque
And
no
plus,
los dos.
if it is the second way, it doubles as a covert way to scold an intoxicated comrade. So win-win.
Hey, yeah.
Was it them gremlins again getting to you, buddy? How you doing over there? Falling asleep at your post.
I mean, hey, look at the
You know?
little green fairy with absinthe. I mean, we have a history of blaming supernatural things on just inebriated human beings or those
do. Humanity has
partaking
oft
of
blamed our own indulgence on other magical things.
mind-altering substances.
Yeah.
Yes. Wormwood.
The flight crews often blamed gremlins for otherwise inexplicable accidents, and the gremlins were even thought at one point to have enemy sympathies.
They're working for the Russians.
Yeah.
The worst
That's
thing
what they
ever.
thought.
No.
Once investigations revealed that enemy aircraft had similar inexplicable mechanical problems, gremlins were portrayed as equal opportunity tricksters, taking no sides in the conflict, but acting out mischief from their own self-interest.
So they're just fae. They're fairies.
Mm-hmm. Basically.
They serve
More or
no
less.
man. They don't work for anyone as long as it
They
serves their
serve no
own
man.
agenda.
And no god. They are the lawless,
Like me.
chaotic
Me, myself, and I.
entities that they are.
We serve no one.
The gremlins term stuck, especially during World War II, and it became such a commonly known phenomenon that there was even a Bugs Bunny cartoon in the 40s,
Mhm.
Falling Hair, in which Bugs battles a gremlin on an airplane. There were designs at one point to feature this cartoon when Gremlins premiered in the 80s, but it never came to be.
Oh, wow.
Industrial safety posters of the 40s played into this message too. One I saw featured a cartoon mechanic and a half dozen miniature ghostly iridescent men in his way with the caption, "Gremlins think it's fun to hurt you. Use care always."
I love like the tongue-in-cheek sort of approach we've taken.
Yes,
like with it.
Exactly.
It's a representation. It's a metaphor almost.
It was
for
a fun little imagining thing that all kinds of grown adult professional people did all together.
Yeah,
you know, like everybody just bought in and said, yeah, that's Gremlins. That's what that is.
It's a much more fun way to say, like, don't put your hand near the propeller or it's going to get chopped off.
A gremlin could get you. Yeah, it's the same thing that we do for kids in fairy tale.
Just for adults who have
we make the monsters.
Have to work.
You know
for
what
a
I mean?
living.
We create the monsters for those purposes, but this is just for working adults.
How many technical issues have we had on this show so far? And we've never once blamed Gremlins.
We haven't, but we probably should have.
I'm disappointed in us.
We
should have covered Gremlins forever ago, years ago, and it would have been
really
a perfect.
Needed that excuse, didn't we?
Yeah. Yes, but going forward, I mean, we won't have any technical issues.
No, definitely not.
No, we
now
will
you're
not.
calling
the
Gremlins to us.
But all the times in the past when it did happen, those were Gremlins.
For sure.
In the past. Everything's in the past. The past isn't real.
Past tense.
It does not exist.
Another highlight from those safety posters, Gremlins love to pitch things at your eyes. Wear safety goggles.
Yes.
It's pretty fun. We'll have to post some of those.
We'll
make sure you guys have seen
really
some of the things I've seen this week.
Gremlins love to crawl inside your heater in midwinter and kill your HVAC, like they did for me.
Yeah, they do.
2 years ago.
They sure do. While most of these professional references are seemingly tongue-in-cheek, like you said, many returning air servicemen claim to have actually seen creatures tinkering with their equipment.
Yes.
One crewman swore he saw a gremlin before an engine malfunction that caused his B-25 Mitchell bomber to rapidly lose altitude, forcing the aircraft to return to base. Aforementioned folklorist, Hazen, likewise gave an alleged eyewitness testimony of these creatures, describing an occasion he found a parted cable which bore obvious tooth marks in spite of the fact that the break occurred in a most inaccessible part of the plane.
I'm sure it wasn't rats.
At this point, Hazen states that he heard a gruff voice demand, "How many times must you be told to obey orders and not tackle jobs you aren't qualified for? This is how it should be done."
It is like the fairies. It's just like the Hildefolk of like Iceland.
And it sounds like he had a lot of like internalized critique, you know, in his noggin at the time.
There's no verbal abuse in the military.
No,
certainly
definitely no
none.
verbal abuse in the military.
None.
Mm-mm.
That's not what they use to
abuse.
manipulate soldiers and make them do whatever they're told.
Woof.
Without question. Absolutely not.
Hazen then says he heard a, quote, musical twang, and another cable was parted.
Again, it's the fairies. These are leprechauns.
Many critics say that this can all be explained by the stress of combat and the dizzying heights, which could cause hallucinations.
A lapse in oxygen? Absolutely.
And in a darker turn, gremlins were also popularized as a reason for mental health issues among operators. And I say nay.
Yeah.
That part was probably just the unrelenting PTSD.
More than likely.
As we're saying, like you just called it out, like he was internalizing things and fears and feelings, as were all of these men and women at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that can manifest in some interesting ways.
Yeah, brainwashing mostly just damages the brain so that it never works properly ever again.
Yeah.
Just because it's obeying orders doesn't mean it's a healthy brain.
If you ever run something through the washing machine you didn't mean to, you know what that's like.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
It's never quite the same.
It's those colors run, unlike the American flag. Yeah, but I mean, there's so much of this in reality still happening today, like with all the UFO sightings. I mean, the UAPs, forgive me, the unidentified aerial phenomenon. Mm-hmm. Most of the reports of these different multi-shaped objects flying through the sky are from fighter pilots. These are highly trained individuals that are trained to see things with their eyes, look for anything that is not supposed to be there out in the skies. I did not mean for that to rhyme, but it happened anyway. These people flying through the skies have been seeing things that are not supposed to be there for a very long time. It used to be little green men, gremlins. Now it's UAPs.
Mm-hmm.
What is happening?
There's always something else out there, isn't there?
This is nothing new.
Mm-mm.
It's crazy how similar.
This paranoia is kind of baked into being a person, especially being a person at a time of conflict or societal collapse, if you will.
Yeah.
It's very much watching what these effects are on the human brain and psyche in real time.
It's just all so crazy.
Briefly fast forwarding to the 60s, this paranoia became the driving force behind one of the most famous episodes of The Twilight Zone, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet.
Such a good episode.
This was directed by Richard Donner, who Christian just reminded me was also the director of The Goonies.
It's all interwoven.
There are so many ties into all of this stuff. All of it.
It's all connected.
It was based on a short story of the same name by Richard Matheson.
Just a couple of dicks.
Just a couple of dicks. I will let you read the summary, but I feel like if anybody knows The Twilight Zone in any capacity, they know this episode. I don't know how this was the one that we all saw.
It's one of the most famous ones. It truly is.
I have a theory, but we'll let you describe it first. Refresh everyone's memory.
In the original episode, a gremlin, appearing here as a stocky ape-like creature, inspects the aircraft's wing with the curiosity of an animal before damaging it. William Shatner plays a passenger named Bob Wilson, just recovering from a mental breakdown, who sees the gremlin on the aircraft's wing and tries to warn the stewardess about it. Eventually, Bob steals a sleeping sky marshal's revolver and causes a breach in the auxiliary exit to shoot the gremlin. When the airplane lands, Bob is removed from the aircraft in a straitjacket. Rod Serling narrates that Bob Wilson's conviction will not hold, as the final scene shows that the gremlin left evidence of Bob's claim, a damaged wing. So we have to work in the mental illness aspect, the mental health concerns.
Because that paranoia was at the core of this. Everyone was thinking he's crazy, and then it turns out he actually wasn't.
That stigma still exists. A lot of pilots are afraid to speak out about seeing UAPs in the sky because they will lose their jobs. They will be dismissed from the military because they've claimed to see something that quote unquote isn't there, quote unquote.
Yeah, think about all the things we don't know and haven't heard about because people are afraid to speak up.
They're so afraid to talk about it because they will be dismissed as mentally ill.
It's just like believing victims of any type of crime,
literally
assault, anything.
Any crime.
Just look into it. You know what I mean? Don't automatically dismiss people as crazy. Or
You're crazy.
Even if people are struggling with their mental health, that doesn't mean that they aren't valid people with valid perspectives.
I think we should start asking these pilots what they were wearing at the time of the sighting. Maybe
so.
Maybe they brought it on themselves. Maybe they painted something on the side of the plane that excited the gremlins and it caused arousal.
And enticed the gremlins into their plane.
Yes. We just, they invited the gremlins there.
It was all their fault.
They're basically asking for it, if you ask me.
Ooh. Hopefully you guys can hear the sarcasm dripping from our voices.
It's sticky with sarcasm. There's a lot of stickiness.
Gooiness.
Some of it is sarcasm. Some of it is gremlin goo. It's hard to say which is which.
Most of us probably know this episode so well because this concept was remade as a segment of Twilight Zone the movie in 1983 with John Lithgow playing a similar character called John Valentine, who is also depicted as suffering from aviatophobia.
I don't know if I've seen that, but maybe.
The thing is,
I do love John Lithgow, though.
Both Steven Spielberg and Joe Dante served as directors on that film.
Right.
And a rolled up poster of that film appears in Gremlins.
Is it Billy's bedroom?
I think it's in Billy's bedroom.
Okay,
we'll
we'll
have to
look
look
for
in
it.
Part 2. But
Look for it.
All of these connections, just the historical significance of Gremlins and then the Twilight Zone probably being the most widely known depiction of a gremlin in modern American media prior to this film.
Right.
It just thrilled me that they had both just directed this. And it all was very much like serendipitous because they didn't know that the concept was going to land in their lap at the same time, essentially.
Right, because Chris Columbus
we'll get there. Yes, we will get there. Gremlins were, as it turns out, actually rather important to the morale of the pilots, according to author and historian Marlon Bresci. He said, Gremlins, while imaginary, played a very important role to the airmen of the Royal Air Force. Gremlin tales helped build morale among pilots, which in turn helped them repel the Luftwaffe invasion during the Battle of Britain during the summer of 1940. The war may have had a very different outcome if the RAF pilots had lost their morale and allowed Germany's plans for Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of the UK, to develop. In a way, it could be argued that Gremlins, troublesome as they were, ultimately helped the Allies win the war. Bressie also noted that morale among the RAF pilots would have suffered if they pointed the finger of blame at each other when these malfunctions or accidents would take place. It was far better to make the scapegoat a fantastic and comical creature than another member of your own squadron. Or just the Fremlin that they were drinking, I guess.
It could be. I mean, I was going to make that connection that when you're facing such a scary enemy, is it not so much more palatable to just kind of attribute all these issues or project your own fear of something going wrong in the face of battle onto a quote unquote imaginary little creature?
A little creature.
If you make it cute, it's so much easier to
stomach.
Face. Yeah, to stomach.
That's the philosophy behind this movie also, and we'll get there too.
I mean, that's not to mention our whole show. But
it all ties together. Just that idea that there's a lot of power in creating like a common enemy. And you would think that for these Royal Air Force pilots, there was enough of a common enemy because they're fighting a war.
Yeah.
But it turns out that's all really damaging and difficult for the human psyche to deal with. So like you said, they're kind of dampening those effects and those feelings and how much they do hate their enemy or how much they've been trained to hate their enemy.
Yeah.
And rather than getting angry with the dude next to them who is, in their perception, fucking something up,
right,
they can just be upset with a gremlin.
I have so many ways to go with this. I have so many thoughts.
There are so many. I had so much trouble getting these notes nailed down because
in my brain
all just
right
feels, it does. It all feels so distinctly human.
Another example of this exact concept is when we had to go fight the Japanese soldiers. We had made them out to be such savage
America
people,
did that
less than human beings.
Always. Ugh.
Right, no, exactly, totally. But I'm saying
othering.
They were made to be such a ferocious adversary that we were so afraid of them that they then had to make a Bugs Bunny cartoon about making fun of them and how ridiculous they were. If Bugs Bunny can defeat the Japanese soldiers, then so can we.
Right.
If a cartoon character can laugh in the face of the enemy.
It's so weird because I feel like this propaganda machine had to create those fearsome, terrifying, loathsome enemies for people to hate, to create the tension and I wouldn't even call it morale, but like the outrage, to create the outrage among the American population so that they wouldn't be against a war or conflict of some kind because they believe that these adversaries deserve to be defeated.
How do you justify the mass murder of innocent people?
Right.
You make them not innocent anymore.
But then they realized it got too big and scary.
Yeah.
It got too...
And they had to dampen it down.
And they had to dampen it down. It's just they had to like balance the level of America's perception of whomever they're trying to, paint in whatever light they want to.
Talk about brainwash. It's almost like we've been manipulated since the beginning of this goddamn country.
Sure have.
The people have been told what to believe
1776
ever since we decided we were too good for crumpets and tea. I love a scone. Scones are delicious. Don't get me started on biscuits.
I'm sure the Royal Air Force did too. With their Fremlin. Scone and a Fremlin.
Scone and a Fremlin. I need my afternoon Fremlin. Oi, you there?
And right in this vein, as we've been saying now, I have it in my notes so much later, but there's so much Gremlins chaos to talk about. We just keep getting ahead of ourselves.
I'm champing at the bit.
Champing. Yes, I was going to correct you if you got it wrong.
Never again.
Dedicated Darklings know that the 20th century was hardly the first time that society needed a scapegoat on which to blame their problems, and then encountered or invented some small-statured folk to incriminate. And you can see many of our previous episodes for tons of lore on similarly mischievous and culturally diverse entities like jinn, leprechauns, imps, elves, fairies, and other fae folk hellbent on human suffering. However major or minor, they can make it.
What have I been saying the whole time? Nothing new under the sun,
They're all related, and you know what thing that they all have the most in common?
People.
people. Ding, ding,
S
ding.
people! Soylent
We are the
Green is
monsters.
people!
We are the monsters. We've been saying it. We've been new, and now we're telling every Darkling that'll listen to us.
Thank you, Scooby-Doo, for teaching us everything we needed to know in kindergarten. The true monsters are the people.
That is the one lesson. And once you learn that lesson, everything else is confetti.
Gotta steal that gold from the mine beneath the ghost town.
In any case, the pervasive Royal Air Force meme, after centuries of that innate human blame game, led our friend, or perhaps our foe, Roald Dahl, himself a Royal Air Force pilot, to publish his first children's novel, Gremlins, in 1943.
Yes, that was a note I made a year ago when I was researching this, and we never did it. We ended up not
And we're here now, and
doing
we
it.
found it.
I forgot about that, so thank you for looking into it.
Absolutely.
You know what? We needed to do that this year.
We needed to be here now.
Because we needed to know about Roald Dahl
We already
first.
needed to know about Roald Dahl. This timeline makes sense.
It all works out.
From what we've learned about Roald Dahl recently in our Wonka episodes and beyond,
Yeah.
it doesn't surprise me that he also claims that he coined the term gremlins.
Oh, what a
But most sources say otherwise.
that guy. You know, I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about you, Mr. Dahl.
He's not making any of them any better, I will
No,
say
you're
that
not
much.
helping your case.
There's a lot that we could say about Roald Dahl's Gremlins, about his ties to Walt Disney, how it was almost made into a Disney movie but never was quite realized. There's a lot of history there too. But
Sure.
I could almost say that the rest is history, but I can't. Although it's literally true. It's more that these Air Force Gremlins inspired both Dahl and Chris Columbus rather than Dahl's story giving way to the 80s film.
Of course. Yes, absolutely.
In my mind, I always kind of thought of it like Chris Columbus read Roald Dahl's story and it kind of became its own thing from there. But that's not the case.
I wondered, but there's so much commentary in the movie about the machines having gremlins in them, which there's a lot of xenophobia there, and there's a lot of American nationalism woven through the script, but not at the fault of Chris Columbus, but mostly as a point he was trying to make with the conclusion of the film.
We're
getting too far ahead of ourselves.
Steamrolling into this concept.
It's all connected with this fear of the other.
Exactly. I hope you Darklings are right there with us, because I feel like everything we've talked about this year, with all of the racial dialogue and tension, all of those elements that have worked their way into most of the films that we've covered this year, I feel like they were all kind of leading us to these points here now, because the nationalism and the blind acceptance of propaganda, etc., really gets us into some difficult places. And as we're saying, at the end of the day, the monster isn't the monster at all. The monster is inside us.
Every time, every single time. There's a whole genre, a sub Reddit, if you will, of cinema that could just be a white man takes a walk through Chinatown.
Yes.
There could be a whole category of film that is about that exact concept of the chaos that ensues because a white man
doesn't understand something.
Doesn't understand the other's culture. And misuses it, right? Misreads it.
A misreading, misuse, misunderstanding.
Usually through a lack of, respect and appreciation.
Respect. I was going to say respect, empathy, all of the above.
They just completely dismiss all the warning signs and go, I know better because I'm a white American. Tried and true American.
There are just
I'm a
so
patriot.
many examples of how and why that's not the case. And here's where our story picks up with Chris Columbus. But I wanted to let you know that for our classic Part 1 behind-the-scenes story purposes, I'll be pulling from a few places as resources, including the DVD featurette, an article from The Guardian, an in-depth Gremlins oral history from Alan Siegel at The Ringer, and all the Wikipedia that your little Darkling hearts can handle. As we were saying, we talked about writer Chris Columbus in our Goonies episode.
We sure did.
And here's how I know that it wasn't Roald Dahl that inspired him. In the behind-the-scenes featurette, Chris said, the original idea for Gremlins came to him while he was living in a not-so-picturesque Manhattan loft. He said he'd sleep with one arm draped over the bed and would occasionally wake to mice brushing past his arm.
Ugh.
And he realized that while, yes, usually the monsters are big, like Godzilla, King Kong, nothing was quite as frightening as the idea that these tiny creatures could start nibbling on you in your sleep.
Because they will.
And I agree. They can hide, these little,
Oh, yeah.
excuse me, right on out.
Rodentia.
He also fondly recalled his father spending hours under the hood of their family car fixing it up, and the way he would always blame the Gremlins for whatever thing had gone wrong.
So this is woven through his family history.
Mm-hmm. His family history and so many others, because it was just such a pervasive idea of the early 20th century.
If he was our age in the 80s, his dad was probably a war vet.
Mm-hmm. Probably. I didn't look that up.
So he would have that would be in his own lexicon.
Mm-hmm.
If something goes wrong, you blame a gremlin.
Mm-hmm.
That's fun. I like that.
And he passed it down to Chris, and Chris thought about it when those mice started scritching and scratching.
I hope I haven't let too much of reality like set into my own psyche, because I want to say things like that for my own children. Like I want to pass that on as like a whimsical, mystical like approach to life.
You will. You won't be able to help it.
I don't think I'll be able to
Because my
stop
dad does
myself.
that stuff. Like that's something that I love about my dad is like he always has those little things, like whatever random, and he doesn't even always know where they came from or why he's saying them. But like that's what I always latched onto as a kid, you know? And I think it's part of what brought me here now and made me love this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just as you said, as he was living in Manhattan and studying at NYU, he frequented Chinatown for his meals and became fascinated with the little alleyways and shops, imagining that their wares would be much more magical than your average supermarket, though he was usually too nervous to go inside.
Really?
He said he wondered what it would be like to purchase a pet at one of the shops, a cuddly, adorable creature that could eventually grow into a horrific monster. He looked up devil in a Chinese-American dictionary, and they had their official species name, Mogwai. When all of these thoughts merged together, Chris wrote it up as a spec script, originally an R-rated horror film.
Yeah.
His agent distributed the script to nearly 50 producers, and about 6 to 8 weeks later, Steven Spielberg called him up personally. His roommate answered the phone, and Chris thought he was kidding. Like, hey, Steven Spielberg's on the phone for you. And he was like, hey, you're an asshole.
Hey, buddy. Hey, you're out. You know how you're writing those scripts? Hey, man, hey, pass the Fremlin. Hey, this dude, he says he's Steven Spielberg. He said he's Steven Spielberg.
That's whenever Chris said that he went to the phone, he said, is it actually Steven Spielberg? And the roommate was like, I mean, it's a guy that says he's Steven Spielberg. Like, that's as much as I can tell you.
God, that'd be like somebody calling and be like, hey, Tim Burton's on the phone for you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You'd be like,
huh?
Come again?
Excuse me?
And what's even funnier is that Steven Spielberg also thought that Chris was hiding behind a pseudonym when he read his name on the spec script.
Chris Columbus?
Chris Columbus? Yeah,
That's
right.
so funny. That's so funny.
Of the script, Steven said, this is like a candy store. This is like every piece of devilish comedy horror that I've ever read before. He bought the script immediately and had Chris fly out to meet with him. And now I can kind of say the rest is history.
Yeah.
Gremlins as his launching point, we know that Chris would go on to write The Goonies very soon after this, and then make his own directorial debut with Adventures in Babysitting. And then, of course, would come Home Alone, Miss Doubtfire, the Harry Potter franchise, etc., etc., etc.
That was some of the stuff I talked about when we covered Goonies, was that Gremlins was the 4th script that he'd ever written, like ever. 4th.
Yeah.
And that got optioned by Steven Spielberg.
The only other feature, I believe, was a student film.
Yeah, so like it's unreal.
He really lucked out, and it's one of those serendipitous things again where it's just the right people happen to be in place doing all the right things, and he on his own accord from down his own family tree line absorbed this legend from his dad, wrote about it, and it got into the hands of some other dudes of similar age, a little older, but of similar age, who had just made a Twilight Zone movie about gremlins. Because it all just trickled down from that one experience in wartime.
They must have loved the concept so much and just said, like, we need to do this again, but like big, like our own thing.
It's one of those things that generation just had in common. And if you think about all the things that we have in common just generationally, all the things that we look back on fondly, and then we start writing about them or talking about them, and they gain interest in the same way.
One of those things.
One of those things. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Hey Darklings, Kaylin here. We know our generation has a surplus of pretty darkness in common, and if there's one thing unpacking our upbringing has taught us, it's just how essential therapy is for shining a flashlight on the darkness in our own lives. I don't know where I'd be without mine. I believe every human can benefit from the perspective of a licensed therapist, Whether you're familiar with your own inner workings or you're just looking for a listening ear, you can give BetterHelp online therapy a try by going to betterhelp.com/prettydark and receive 10% off your first month. I get that online therapy can be tricky, but I've been seeing my therapist online since 2020, and I'm here to tell you that it's absolutely worth it. Getting started is always the hardest part, and BetterHelp makes that easy. You can begin right from your phone or computer in whatever way makes you most comfortable, via good old-fashioned phone calls, video chats, or even messaging, if that's more your style. We enjoy this frightful nostalgia and learning about how it all connects, but Darklings know we're also passionate about healing and growing from what we learn. If you dare to do the same, head to betterhelp.com/prettydark. There you can answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people like us. Plus, you can switch therapists at any time, so you're sure to find the right connection. Millennials are ditching the stigma and owning our mental health. And with BetterHelp, you can build a relationship with a professional all from the comfort of your own home, just how we like it. Visit betterhelp.com/prettydark or choose That's Pretty Dark podcast during sign up and enjoy 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/prettydark. As they began to workshop and brainstorm, it became clear that Steven intended to soften the film and make it a little more accessible to a wider audience, as in it was no longer going to be rated R.
The Steven Spielberg way.
For example, in earlier drafts, Chris had Billy's mother dying in her struggle with the Gremlins, with her head being thrown down the stairs.
Oh, so they made it the Gremlins' head instead.
Yes.
I like that. All right.
In another cutscene, Gremlins ate Billy's dog.
Holy shit. Wait, no, Alf isn't supposed to eat the cat.
I know. Or the dog.
Or the dog.
And in another scene that Chris Columbus particularly liked and was sad to have it cut from the script, the Gremlins attacked a McDonald's restaurant, eating the customers and leaving the burgers behind on the tables.
That would be so fun. God, I wish that had stayed. They did leave in a Burger King product placement sign. But
much like Back to the Future. Burger King was the fast food of the time.
Yeah, because they looked up every McDonald's location and then they put a Burger King across the street.
Capitalized on it. The American dream.
Easy. And they probably saved millions in research.
One script sticking point that Steven was not a fan of was Kate's speech about her dad and Santa at the end.
Why
and I'm sure
not?
Christian will take us into deeper waters about the urban legend and the inspiration and all that, so I'll leave that for him to dissect. But ultimately, this did stay in thanks to the director's philosophy that it perfectly encapsulated the tone of the film. Horror, comedy, and sometimes not knowing which it needed or wanted to be.
And Christmas.
And speaking of the director, Spielberg was comfortable at the helm as executive producer. He actually briefly considered Tim Burton to direct, who at the time had not directed a feature, but instead tapped Joe Dante, based on the sort of dark Norman Rockwell spirit he was able to capture in his previous films, Piranha and The Howling.
Oh, he did The Howling?
He did The Howling, and a lot of the crew here did The Howling as well. I had also had that thought about the dark side of Norman Rockwell. Like, I'm pretty sure I put it in my watch notes when I was watching Last Christmas.
That's a really good way to put that, too.
Steven Spielberg said it in the behind-the-scenes feature interview, and I was like,
That's
thinking
incredible.
like Spielberg.
Thinking like Spielberg.
Not that this was a far leap, but, you know.
I was given the book of, Think Like Da Vinci or something like that for Christmas one year. Think Like Spielberg. I need that one, too.
Oh, that I could.
The dark side of Norman Rockwell. I reference Norman Rockwell in most things I write.
You sure do.
It was a trend that I didn't realize until I did it like 5 or 6 times. So I really appreciate that as a commentary element.
It seems that was one of the most enduring features of Joe Dante's filmmaking. 50s Americana as B-movie horror.
That's so sick. That's so fucking cool.
It's really great.
I love that so much.
And we know that you do, because Joe Dante went on to do one of your favorites, The Burbs.
Yeah!
As well as 5 episodes of Erie, Indiana, which gets pitched to us all the time. We do want to talk about it. We desperately want to. Looney Tunes Back in Action, and more. Aside from losing some of the less polished moments, we'll call them, Steven's primary suggestion to modify the tone came by way of Gizmo.
Yes.
In Chris's original script, all of the Gremlins went sour.
Right,
Sour Patch
even
Kid,
Gizmo.
including Gizmo as the ringleader.
Yeah,
But
I read that he wasn't supposed to be a main character. He was just one of the Gremlins.
Right.
Like
Steven
Stripe.
suggested that one of the Gremlins remain true to its Mogwai form, which gave Billy a sidekick and provided an effective emotional lever to pull and merchandising opportunity, while still maintaining the script's satirical edge. Thus, the character of Stripe was born, splitting Gizmo's intended personality in 2. It seems that they could push up against the limits of horror as long as there existed a cute character for viewers to latch onto. Sound familiar?
Damn you, Steven Spielberg, you genius!
And just as was the case with E.T., because I'm sure I'm not the only one amongst you darklings that sort of remembers E.T. as a horror movie because, oh my God, I still can't watch it. This proved true. He brought the project to Warner Brothers, who gave plenty of notes along the way and would co-produce it through his company Amblin Entertainment. He also peppered in his fair share of E.T. and self-references, which I am sure that Christian will also regale us with in part 2.
Do my damnedest.
For example, though, the titles on the theater marquee that we see in the movie, A Boy's Life, was the working title for E.T., and Watch the Skies was the working title for Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yes, which a lot of was filmed right here where we live.
Yeah, we have a special place in our heart for Close Encounters.
And they're thinking about moving the house.
I know. I keep seeing articles about it. Despite their best efforts to temper the guts and the gore from the original script.
And the glory.
Gremlins still sits in pretty dark infamy, along with Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, as the film, which prompted Steven to petition the Motion Picture Association of America, the MPAA, to alter its rating system, which it did within 2 months of Gremlins' theatrical release, creating the PG-13 rating as we know it today.
Damn.
Although it may have been preferable for this to have happened prior to the release of the film. Joe Dante later admitted to reporters that the idea of taking a 4-year-old to see Gremlins, thinking it's going to be a cuddly, funny animal movie, and then seeing that it turns into a horror picture, I think people were upset. They felt like they'd been sold something family-friendly, and it wasn't entirely family-friendly.
When I watched it today, the rating said PG.
Because PG-13 didn't exist until 2 months after it came out.
That's crazy.
And by today's standards, who knows? Maybe it is more of a PG than a PG-13.
Honestly.
But back then, there was not a whole lot of middle ground between a rated R picture and a G for all audiences.
That's true. That's true. It just walked the line. Like so many Spielberg and like Tim Burton movies do. Like PG-13 needed to exist.
Children's horror, as we know it,
right,
doesn't have a clear landing place, even still.
And I mean, look at all the teen horror flicks of the 90s we never would have gotten if we'd never had PG-13.
Yeah, because people would have been afraid.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have known where to put it. They would have been afraid to make it. So they would have probably amped it up. And then at least people like me wouldn't have gotten to see it in our teens, you know?
Right.
It really has an effect, profound effect, on the media that actually makes it into the hands of the intended or unintended audience, you know?
That's true.
And how it shapes our thinking and our lives and our minds and our storytelling. It's interesting also because multiple of the early drafts of the script had all of the leads being like closer to 12 years old, like way more of like a Stranger Things situation.
Oh, wow.
And it was a studio note. It was a Warner Brothers thing that they bump it up to have teenagers because they wanted teens to be interested in it.
Yeah. Wow. I did not realize that.
And that's kind of the reason why Billy and Pete are friends.
That's so fun. All right.
They kept one character at that age and aged it up.
Yeah. Wow.
So it kind of could have been worse on the whole, being sold a family-friendly movie and then not having that promise delivered upon.
I mean, when you have Corey Feldman, you have to do that.
Yeah, actually.
I mean, what are you going to do?
Spielberg had dropped Corey Feldman from E.T., dropped his character from E.T., and this is where he put him instead.
To put him in Gremlins?
In both of them, he was going to be the best friend of the kid with the creature.
Wow.
That was always his destiny.
He's perfect at that, though. Being the best friend of the main character.
In the Spielberg universe.
Because you love him.
Can't help but love him.
You can't help but love Corey Feldman. He is the best friend we all wish we'd had.
The Goonies, the Stand By Me's. Principal photography began on Christian's birthday, April 27th, 1983.
That's what I like to hear.
Just
Hell
a few
yeah.
years before you were around. And ended on August 3rd.
8 years before I was born.
And this principal photography took place on the Universal Studios backlot, which was a decision that both Spielberg and Joe Dante were in complete agreement about.
That's where Chris lived in in Spielberg's bungalow when he wrote the rewrites.
Dante said, "The only way to make the story believable was if it was completely stylized. I insisted on shooting it on backlots, creating a small town setting, evoking Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life."
Oh, yeah.
We actually included a clip of that in the film in case the audience didn't get the message.
This movie really is It's a Wonderful Life meets Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
And that is exactly, I think, what Joe Dante wanted it to be.
I mean, I think it's so obvious because they included clips, so many from both movies. This is the perfect
They were not afraid at all to reference the things that they were emulating.
I love that.
Which is fun, I think, especially in the 80s. That was such like a touchstone of the time. just say the thing. Like, you want to be this? Just say it.
In case I don't get it, here are the actual movie clips we're trying to talk about.
Like, put it right in front of their faces, especially if it's teenagers. They're not going to get it. Put it in front of them.
The dark side of Norman Rockwell.
Although they had originally intended to use the so-called Dukes of Hazzard Street on the Warner Brothers lot for the Kingston Falls exteriors, scheduling delays forced Gremlins to move to Universal Studios' Town Square set for these sequences of the film, making it more closely related to, say, Back to the Future.
Yeah.
Production designer James Spencer shares credit with several of the crew like Burbs and Poltergeist, and was responsible for not only designing the sets, but for all of the wacky inventions on set as well. And mixed into all of this not-so-subliminal messaging were quite a few satirical sociological messages as well. But all of this commentary was packaged in the whimsical, the wacky, and the bloody. Which brings us to one of the biggest components, the special effects. The designer, the man behind the Gremlins, if you will, Chris Wallace, had worked on Piranha, which was Dante's first feature as a director. And he had also done all of the melting, exploding Nazis at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was a major claim to fame for him.
Yeah.
For Gremlins, he had a whole workshop that was reminiscent of Jim Henson's, as I was reading about it, that was dedicated to bringing these cute, cuddly, and then completely harrowing beings to life on screen.
Yes, I read this.
The design team was said to come to understand the premise of Gremlins a little more fully when they were building the carol-singing Gremlins. Once they were dressed in human clothing, it was easy to see. Quoting, "They're parodies of people."
Really?
Apparently that was a big revelation amongst the Gremlin designers. They're like, oh, I get it now. Yeah.
Is this just something that we understand innately today?
I think so, based on
being a brand new concept,
historical evidence that the people are the monsters and the monsters are the people, and Western society has a lot of shit it needs to work out with its own history and the horrors it has inflicted and the biases it has internalized, etc., etc., etc.
etc., etc.
When discussing the original concept for the look and feel of the Gremlins, Wallace said,
"After reading the script, my first idea was to take the tarsier, a little primate, and give it cartoony proportions. I wanted the big eyes to make it cute. I showed it to producer Mike Fennell and Joe Dante, and they asked for some tweaks. So I made the next one more like a puppy, big floppy ears. It's not based on any one dog in particular, just a Cocker Spaniel or something. Fortunately, they did not go with it." So
the floppy ears.
The puppy-like floppy ears, right.
We got a different look.
Thank God.
And ironically, he said it was not based on any specific dog, but the final coloring of Gizmo, including the white patch of fur around his right eye, was actually modeled after one of Steven Spielberg's dogs.
Of course.
The designers said that Steven had been really particular about the look of the gremlin up until this point, but it was almost subconscious for him when they showed him this design, and he ended up loving the coloring once they made this alteration.
Yeah, I get that. That's fun.
Not to say he didn't know it looked like his dog, but it became a little more his idea, you know?
Yeah, of course.
Wallace said, "I had this meeting with Steven and Joe, and we were there talking about the nature of the Gremlins, and it was really funny because Steven's just kind of like, they should be really nasty and hunched over, and I'm like, yeah, this is what I'm thinking for the pose. And they walk around, but more like hopping. And Joe's like, yeah, and then they do this. And then there's three of us jumping and hopping around the coffee table like lunatics."
God, to sit in on one of those meetings, to be a part of one of those meetings.
Just to be a fly on the wall.
Oh, it's so fun.
Wallace was also the one to suggest that they use puppets instead of Dante's originally proposed stop motion idea, because Wallace did not think that Dante comprehended the amount of stop motion that would be required in the film.
Oh my God.
And Dante said he did, he just thought it might be fun anyway.
Yeah.
And speaking of things that he thought might be fun, in a self-admitted, less inspired moment, Dante also wondered whether they could get actual primates to wear suits or hats.
Jesus Christ.
Unfortunately, they tested this suggestion at Joe Dante's office, and the rhesus monkey that they were working with totally lost it, started tearing the office apart, was defecating all over the place.
Yes.
So Dante yelled for the trainer to come get the monkey, and then he turned to Wallace, deadpan, and said, "So, puppets?"
Can you imagine how scary it would be? Like, first of all,
No.
to be a person and to be completely costumed in something, it's a bit claustrophobia inducing, especially with the mask and the breathing is difficult. But to be an animal that cannot comprehend what is happening,
That
and you
doesn't know
put
what's
it
going on.
in a costume with
and
a
you
mask,
put it in a costume.
and it can't breathe and it can't hear things normally, and it starts to freak out.
Yeah, which is exactly what happened. And just reading about it gave me flashbacks to like Nope and the Chimp Crazy documentary that I just watched and talked about this summer.
Totally.
Yeah, primates aren't people, but they're close enough to have really, really negative effects with their mental state.
They're the closest thing besides like orcas and giant squid and octopi.
And what is it, bananas or something? What is it, the fruit that we share our DNA with? I don't remember.
That's news to me.
But it's also funny to put ourselves in like the time frame that this was. This was the very early 80s. CGI is nothing like we know it to be.
Right.
Spielberg was on the cutting edge of figuring out animatronics and CGI for things like Jurassic Park, but that was still a ways off.
Yes.
Even the discussions that we've had about things like Casper were in the distant future, or distant enough to make these suggestions not sound so crazy at the time.
Sure.
Now we hear a suggestion like that and we're like, how could you even conceive of it? But when they're imagining, how do we get hundreds of these little critters to look believable on screen? They were just kind of exhausting every resource that they could.
I mean,
he did admit that one was a bridge too far.
And puppets had been successfully done. All
Yes.
things Jim Henson.
Yes, like puppets had proven their concept.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah.
Like it was a very, very artistic, very specialized field and medium, but it was very effective.
Yes.
And there were ways to make it very effective.
There were people who knew how to do it well versus the other stuff.
There is a whole making of documentary that I'm referencing some quotes from, but half of that documentary focuses just on the sculpting and the building of the puppets,
right?
The animatronics. It's so time intensive, and it takes a very special mind because it's equal parts art and mechanics. It's equal parts. It's left and right brain, and you got to know how to do it all and how to make it move and look believable.
Because like some were robots versus some of them being handheld. Like there was a combination of both.
Right.
I know most of that because I was researching this specifically like a year ago. Chris Wallace made a documentary himself, Gremlins, A Puppet Story.
Which, I could not find that.
I couldn't find it. It premiered and then it was online for a while, and then it has been stripped from every location where you could watch it.
Chris Wallace, will you please put it back on the internet?
Yeah, send it to us.
We want to watch it.
If any of you guys know where to find it, please send us a link. I really, really wanted to watch that because he made it. He was very proud of that film showcasing his work, and I really want to, see what he had to say about it.
Yeah, there was just so much that went into it. The decision to rewrite Gizmo's character to that of a good guy was especially challenging for Wallace and his team. When they entered pre-production, Gizmo was only supposed to be present in his original Mogwai form for the first third of the story.
Right.
But then suddenly, he had to carry the whole movie.
He had to be a character the entire time.
Wallace said, "This is 2 months before we're going to shoot, and there was no way we were going to get this little bucket of bolts to be interesting and mobile enough to carry a movie. So we had to build giant versions of the puppet with huge heads in order to get the close-ups and get the emotion right."
Yeah.
And as for the mobility issue, Wallace said Joe's solution to that was to keep sticking Gizmo into boxes and backpacks, which effectively solved the problem.
That is where he spends the entire movie.
It's so funny to me because it worked so well for the movie. He was just, stowed away somewhere in a little spot, and it made him cuter. Honestly, it helped. Like there were no downsides to this really. But it's funny to me that it was just a convention of not being able to get him from point A to point B without it.
Sitting in the bed watching TV. It's so cute. It's so cute.
While I didn't have a whole documentary, I had some pull quotes from Wallace, and he talked about how the whole process of convincing the studio that the puppets wouldn't just be laughed off screen was arduous.
Right.
Wallace said he stayed up 40 hours straight at one point to have a puppet ready for an impromptu meeting with Terry Semel, who is the president of Warner Brothers. In the Ringer interview, which again also features producer Mike Fennell and Warner Brothers executive Lucy Fisher, he detailed, "As soon as we had the molds for the Gremlins finished, the studio wanted to see another test. And they were like, we're coming up on Friday." And I'm like, we can't have a puppet ready by Friday. That's 3 days from now. And Joe came up and Mike came up and John Hora, the director of photography, came up. Producer Kathleen Kennedy, which goes hand in hand with Spielberg, really. I haven't even mentioned her yet, but she was integral in so many of his productions. She was there too. He said, we just shot a whole bunch of stuff, just random stuff. And then Joe managed to cut all of that together somehow. And I don't know how he did it to this day, but he showed the studio. And based on that, the studio kind of went, okay, this could work.
Yeah. I mean, because, puppets were proven, but how do you make puppets scary? Mm-hmm. That's a whole nother layer to convincing the studio that this is going to work.
And I mean, the 80s is famous for nothing if not the scary puppet.
It's true.
Eventually.
Absolutely
we got there. Humankind, one small step for Gizmo, one giant leap for Stripe.
We never would have had Child's Play if we didn't have Gremlins.
It's true, honestly. Mike Fennell, producer, said, Lucy called us and says, come up to the office. And we go, oh my God, damn it. Is it good news or bad news? And Lucy said, I went out to the hardware store and I bought a little green light and put it in a little box. I was so excited to tell them and I wanted to make it a little ceremony. And Mike said, we go into her office and she has this cardboard box and she opens it up and there's this light bulb in it painted green, meaning green light. Here's the green light. And it was like, oh, thank God. And then Wallace said, Mike calls me up and says, hey, good news. We got the green light. And I'm like, we didn't have the green light?
What do you mean?
I'm just picturing Chris Wallace in his workshop with all of his elves that are working on all of these puppets. And he's like, good news, we're greenlit. And he's like, what were we 5 minutes ago?
Can you imagine how much?
What were we 5 minutes ago when I was breaking my back on this?
How many thousands of dollars went into making these puppets? And he's just like, what?
Excuse me?
How many hours did he not spend with his family when he was there making puppets?
Oh, some of his family worked in the puppet shop. I don't remember all of the names of them, but there were several Wallaces involved, which it's very much like Jim Henson. It was a family affair.
Yeah.
But like I said, puppet people are special people.
It's because they're so good with their hands.
I also felt somewhat of a kindred spirit feeling with Lucy Fisher as I, read the interview and heard her described this executive at Warner Brothers who is fighting tooth and nail against all of the bookkeepers and naysayers and business-minded people to let these creative folks, live it out and make it happen. And so she's kind of fighting on their side. And I think it's so funny that she was like, I wanted to make it special, like that they get to go ahead with the green light. I was like,
I wanted to be
me.
theatrical like you guys.
Me and Lucy, we'd be buds. And speaking of lights, one of the reasons for the no bright lights Gremlins rule was to compensate for any special effects snafus.
That's so great.
It's an old sci-fi trick, one that we reference here all the time. If you keep the bad thing in the dark, it helps maintain the illusion and camouflage any imperfections that might take a viewer out of the story.
Yeah, I mean, bright lights reveal everything. That's why nobody likes overhead lights. Nobody likes overhead LEDs because you can see too much.
Me and light bulbs, we have our beef.
That's why clubs are dark. Most bars are dark. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a nice moody, smoky bar.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's the best.
I want it to be as dark as possible.
Pitch black.
And so do the Gremlins for that reason, which I thought was really smart, actually, to build it into the story in that very cohesive way.
That is smart.
It also took a very special cinematographer to brave the challenge of Gremlins. And this fell to DP John Hora, who had worked with Joe Dante on The Howling after being contacted by producer Mike Fennell. There is a super, super in-depth article on American cinematographer if you are into camera and lighting related breakdowns, because that's a whole science and a whole fascinating part of filmmaking that my mind loves and eats up, but also cannot, I don't think in those terms. I can understand them when they're presented to me, but to make all of that up and to imagine and do the kind of mathematical equations that go into lighting, camera, etc., all of it. It's so brilliant. And there's a lot to it, yeah. Just an awesome article. So if you're into that, highly recommend going and finding that. But John Hora in that article said, Dante and I have an interesting, comfortable relationship. Perhaps it's because Joe has this sardonic sense of humor and I have what has been described as an overdeveloped sense of irony.
Overdeveloped.
As cast gifts, the two leads had t-shirts made with the phrase, hurry, Hora. And Dante laughed at this memory. Dante said, that's the thing about directors of photography. They love to light. They will light and light as long as you let them light.
They will. They sure will. They'll take their sweet time doing it. I know this
to be true. As we've said, the smaller size of the Gizmo puppet proved convenient in some ways and very inconvenient in others. It led to a lot of crew frustration because their small size and complicated mechanics often resulted in frequent hiccups and breakdowns.
Mm-hmm.
While Wallace originally recommended making the Mogwais larger to both make creation and function a bit easier on the design team and the crew, Dante insisted on keeping their size small for maximum cuteness, and therefore audience relatability. However, to satisfy the ever-patient crew, Dante did construct a scene where the evil gremlins hang Gizmo on a wall and use him for dart practice.
Yeah.
This punishment was included on a running list that the crew kept and updated during their filming delays, known as the Horrible Things to Do to Gizmo list.
Jesus.
They wanted to destroy him.
Poor Gizmo.
So they put it in the movie. And it's not Gizmo's fault, y'all.
No, he's so sweet.
It wasn't Gizmo's fault in the first place. He didn't even ask to be sold to Billy's dad in the first place. He was just existing.
He never wanted that. He just wanted to sing his songs.
That's it.
And, again, you and I could be trusted with the magic typewriter that makes things come true, even if just in dreams. But we could also be trusted with a Mogwai.
Our cats could not, however. I do not see Phoebe, Buzz, Atlas, nor Sphinx getting along with a Mogwai.
No, that's okay.
But we could.
I want a Gizmo.
I love a little Gizmo.
He's so sweet.
As we know, you can have your very own in the form of a Furby.
That's true. Come full circle.
They did inspire the Furby.
What, 2 Christmases ago?
An enlarged Gizmo puppet was also needed for the scene in which he multiplies.
Ooh.
The new Mogwai who pop out of Gizmo as small furry balls were balloons, and they expanded as such. But I have trypophobia, and as soon as I realized what was happening, like once I figured out what the intention was for the scene, I could no longer watch. I had to turn my head and wait for it to be over. It bothered me deeply. Deeply. And it doesn't really help to know that they were balloons.
This doesn't help at all, huh?
Wallace also created that exploding gremlin in the microwave by allowing a balloon to burst.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Practical effects.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Pre-CG era. Zach Galligan, who played Billy, recounted that the technology being what it was at the time, each gremlin animatronic cost between $30,000 and $40,000.
Whoa, in 1980s money?
In 1980s money, which would translate to $60,000 to $90,000 today.
Damn. So, okay, that's just the puppets that move on their own. You can control with like a remote or whatever. The animatronics. Yeah. Not the puppets that would be handheld.
Right. But there were many of all of the above.
That's crazy, though. That's insane. That's an insane amount of money.
They were so expensive that when everyone left the lot for the day, security would have them open their trunks to make sure that no gremlins were stowing away.
Oh, that's smart, though, because I would steal one. I'd want to.
Sometimes that kind of thing can just walk right off set.
Brain fart.
I didn't realize I was just hanging with my gremlin buddy, and then all of a sudden we were at home.
Just worked a 16-hour day.
He was listed on eBay. eBay wasn't a thing yet.
No, but soon.
They were quite expensive. Though, on acting with puppets, Zach did say in an interview with The Guardian,
acting opposite Gizmo wasn't difficult, because pretending a lifelike puppet is a live animal is no harder than pretending a woman you've just met has been your wife for 15 years. It was beneficial having practical special effects because I was reacting to a thing that was really there in front of me, as opposed to stuff you're attempting to imagine, as you would with CGI. You can even see it in the performance of the dog, Barney, which must be one of the top 10 animal performances in movies. He was convinced the puppets were real.
Barney deserved every award.
Every award.
They talked about it in some of the interviews. Like they used him as their like guaranteed cutaway. If they needed somewhere for the scene to go, if they needed a cut to go to, it was Barney's reaction, because Barney always had perfect reactions. They said he was one of the best dog actors they had ever worked with. The director even echoed this. Like he had just the perfect, like he looked smug when they were talking about him. He looked worried when he was worried about Gizmo. Like he really just
great.
Nailed it. And
but how would he know award. He wouldn't know they weren't real.
Right.
If they move to him, that's real.
Yes.
So he's probably freaked
Bless
out.
Him.
Poor Barney.
Who knows what they smelled like?
Oh, polyethylene.
But not everybody took it as seriously as Barney did. As for the ubiquitous Gremlins rulebook, the Ringer interview poked fun at the concept. Lucy Fisher said, "I remember very well trying to justify it to our business affairs guy, who I was at war with, about every single thing I tried to do. He would go, 'Well, what does that mean, after midnight? If it's 6 a.m, that's still after midnight? I don't understand the rules.' And I'd go, 'You don't have to.'" Joe Dante said, "They're so arbitrary. I mean, let's face it. one thing that we figured is if people don't buy this, they're not going to buy the movie. The idea was that if they go for this, then they'll sit and watch the movie. It was like, okay, those are the rules, and you guys play fair, and then we'll let you get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true. It takes a certain kind of person. You either are going to buy in or not.
Yeah. How late is too late? How wet is too wet? You know?
And how bright is too bright?
They didn't know about blue light yet.
Where are the lines? We don't know, but we're going to trust that the film will handle it, and we just get to passively watch.
Well, guys, it's that time of year again. Everyone's online shopping, drinking hot drinks, and looking forward to the next gathering with friends and family. But if you're anything like me, you've been too busy out night hunting for that wily Tailipo to even think about the holidays. He's not going to get me, no, sir. Not this year. But this comes at a cost, and I don't mean your life or your dog's lives. I'm talking about that mountain man beard and all that scraggly body hair you've neglected in the name of survival. But never fear. Thanks to Manscaped's Performance Package 5.0 Ultra, it's never been more easy to remove all the hairs from your Tailipo. This package is the all-in-one grooming kit featuring the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra to get your chestnuts ready for roasting, of course, and the Weed Whacker 2.0 for trimming those pesky nose and ear hairs to help you always deck your halls in style. Not to mention everything else you need to preserve your most precious of ornaments. The Crop Soother Ball Aftershave Lotion and the Crop Preserver Anti-Chafing Ball Deodorant to polish up those jingle bells and keep you dashing through the snow. This Performance Package 5.0 Ultra comes with 2 holiday bonuses. That's the Boxers 2.0 in Midnight Bravo and the Shed 2.0 toiletry bag, so you're never unprepared for that figgy pudding. So forget the Tailipo for now and join over 11 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped for all their holiday needs. Use the code PRETTYDARK for 20% off plus free shipping at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code PRETTYDARK at manscaped.com. Trust me, the Tailipo will still be there when you get back, because it's always there. Always.
Our final piece of production magic is always the music.
Dun, 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 dun,
The film score
dun,
was
dun,
composed
dun,
by
dun,
Jerry
dun,
Goldsmith,
dun,
who
dun,
won
dun.
a Saturn Award for Best Music for his efforts. Composing, producing music, and conducting since the 60s, he has plenty of Pretty Darkness on his resume, including 55 episodes of The Twilight Zone,
Ooh,
212
nice.
episodes of The Waltons. I had to include that for my mom. Conductor for the orchestra, composing Secret of Nim,
Okay.
Twilight Zone, the movie,
Yeah.
the conductor for the Burbs score,
Damn.
and more.
That's cool.
What really got me, though, about Jerry Goldsmith is that he is credited frequently on the IMDb for things like The Land Before Time and An American Tale, and I wondered why that was, because he didn't have a specific role on those films that I could tell. It turns out he's credited because he composed the Universal Studios jingle,
No kidding.
you know, that plays with the Universal logo. I can't believe, anytime I find somebody that made something like that like shaped my childhood and my life, it just shocks me. I'm like, from your brain came this little jingle that I heard hundreds of thousands of times in my life.
You just got to do it one time.
Goldsmith said that the main score was composed with the objective of conveying the mischievous humor and mounting suspense of Gremlins, like you were describing earlier, Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Goldsmith also wrote Gizmo's song, which was hummed by Aline Keyes, a child actress and acquaintance of Goldsmith, rather than Gizmo's voice actor.
Oh, wow.
Goldsmith himself makes a cameo in the film alongside Steven Spielberg in the scene where Rand calls home from the salesman's convention.
Okay, nice. He's not the robot, is he?
That would be great. And now, dear Darklings, the moment you've probably not been waiting for, but that always ends up revealing some kind of unexpected, exciting trivia, the cast breakdown.
The casting. First up.
The making of documentary does go into some detail about some of the casting, and the chemistry between their two leads was really important. So I think,
Of course.
honestly, that Phoebe Cates was probably attached sooner than Zach Galligan, but they all did feel strongly that when you're watching something this fantastical, and especially in a horror, oftentimes it's better to use lesser known actors because it helps the audience kind of get past it quicker. Like if you're watching
Right.
somebody that you know really well, it's harder to get into the story.
Of course.
So
yes.
that was important to them from the get-go. So Zach Galligan was one of their early favorites, but he reprises his role in Gremlins 2, and he also appeared in Waxwork and Waxwork 2. He hadn't done a whole lot prior to this, and the reason that he ended up getting the part, actually, is because they had him screen test with Phoebe Cates, who plays Kate Berenger. And at the time, although we think of her now as kind of a bombshell of the 80s,
Fast Times,
she had only
Richmond
just
High.
done Fast Times. Like, that had only just happened the year prior.
It just happened.
Like, she was honestly probably screen testing and auditioning for this before Fast Times had even, like, actually come out.
That's crazy.
So,
wow.
Maybe not quite that soon, but, like, it was all happening right around the same time, and she had not exploded in success the way that, you know, we know Phoebe Cates today.
Sure.
She also did Private School, Drop Dead Fred, and several others. But
yes, we're going to cover Drop Dead Fred.
Yeah, we get that a lot.
One of my favorites.
But Phoebe Cates is actually kind of the reason that Zach Galligan was cast, because they had a chemistry test together. And when it was between scenes, like, they weren't actively reading lines. Apparently, Zach just kind of leaned over and, like, rested his head on her head or her shoulder and was just looking at her. And he said in his mind, in this interview that I was watching, he said in his mind, he was just, how lucky am I that I get to do this and act here with this very talented, beautiful girl. And, like, I'm just in, like, a very surreal moment of my life right now. And when Steven Spielberg saw him do that out of character, Steven said, I don't need to see anymore. He's already in love with her. Like, we're good. Yeah. Like, these are our leads. And I thought that was so cute. Like, he was in a genuine moment of his life, and that's what Steven saw and said, that's how we know. And I love that.
I mean, yeah. Be hard not to do.
Yeah, I think I would feel the same way if I were watching. Like, casting, we talk about it all the time. That's one of my favorite parts of filmmaking. I have enjoyed it so much the times that I've been lucky enough to be behind a casting desk. Not so much the auditioning part, but the decision making and how you can make that magic come together. We say it every time, but it takes
it's something you have to see.
You have to see it. You have to know. It really takes, like, that foresight to know this is going to work, and I know why.
It's the physical embodiment or the physical manifestation of reading between the lines.
Yes.
Of, like,
it takes
you're
so much of
every
that
actor
skill.
that comes in here is going to read the lines on the page, but it's what happens
between
those moments.
Any good casting director, I think, would probably agree with that wholeheartedly. Hoyt Axton plays Billy's father, Randall Rand Peltzer. He was known for ad-libbing his lines, but most everyone on set really loved his performances. He got along really well with Joe Dante. They kind of cut up behind the scenes together, and you can see some of that in the making of documentaries. Like, he just seemed to have a really good time wherever he went, and he was very grateful to be there. He was a renowned country singer-songwriter, and he appeared in films like The Black Stallion and Disorganized Crime.
He's got a great voice.
And his mother had written Heartbreak Hotel for Elvis.
No, really.
So Chris Columbus was, as a self-proclaimed, like, music fanatic, already was thrilled to meet Hoyt Axton just based on his mom and her legacy as a songwriter. But I found out, one of my favorite little pieces of cast trivia through this, that Hoyt Axton himself wrote Three Dog Nights, Joy to the World. So maybe Jeremiah was a gremlin.
That's good.
I was pleased by that one.
He has a great voice.
He does.
He seemed like he was having fun. He seemed like he was a handful. Like, he would be difficult to rein in. Be like, Hoyt, can you just say the line, please?
I think
Hoyt.
For the wrong director, that would absolutely be true. But for Joe Dante got him, and he got Joe Dante. So literally, he would be like, for example, in the scene where they are, where he's giving Billy the rules of the Gremlins.
Yes.
Joe Dante just said, throw the script out. Like, you know the rules. As long as you get across these rules, I don't care what you say. And so everything, he said, say it how you would say it. And he does. It's so believable. It's like a dad talking to his kid.
That's the scene that always, like, throws me. I'm like, what am I looking at here? You're this guy. I don't know where to place you. Are you really good at this, or are you really bad at this? I can't tell.
And I think that's what they loved about him in this movie. Like, that was the perfect, they wanted that exact vibe.
It's just, are
you such a good actor that I believe you too much? Or are you such a bad actor that you're not acting?
Yeah.
And it's
you're
like,
leaning into the,
sometimes you're such a good actor that you're not acting.
I can't tell. I can't tell with Hoyt.
Yeah.
Hoyt.
Oh, Hoyt.
Hoyt.
Frances Lee McLean played Lynn Peltzer, Billy's mother, and her other notable appearances included Footloose, She appeared as Lorraine's mother in Back to the Future, so they brought her on. And then she was also in Stand By Me as well. So this same kind of group of films and credits kind of followed a lot of the cast and crew. And speaking of, next up we have Corey Feldman. Who played Pete Fontaine. We know, of course, we've already talked about him before because Corey was in The Goonies, also Stand By Me, and famously The Lost Boys.
Yes.
And as I said earlier, he was added to this cast when Steven dropped his character from E.T., but Steven couldn't let him go. He knew that Corey had this brilliance and knew that he needed to be part of this film. I'm glad he did.
And he does.
Glad he's doing better.
God bless Corey Feldman.
Kiye Luke played Mr. Wing. He also appeared in Kung Fu in the 70s, and he voiced characters in The Jungle Book and Alice in Wonderland. So he was like a Disney great from that era.
He's very familiar to me, his look. It might just be from Gremlins, but I feel like I've seen him in a few things.
Murray Futterman was played by Dick Miller, and he was another frequent collaborator with Joe Dante, appearing in Howling, Burbs, and also Small Soldiers as well in the late 90s. One of my favorite supporting actresses because of her role in The Parent Trap was Polly Holliday as Ruby Deagle. She's best known for her role as Flo in the TV series Alice in the 70s. She also appeared in Mrs. Doubtfire, and her role in The Parent Trap as the camp counselor, like she's Marva, like it's a mother-daughter duo that are the camp counselors in Parent Trap, and the daughter is played by Maggie Wheeler, who plays Janice in Friends. So it's Polly Holliday and Maggie Wheeler, and they are so good together comedically. I feel like Parent Trap shaped a lot of my life. We know this. We've talked about this. It's the summer camp element, but it's also like the comedy between the two of them and the way they played off of each other. So good. So I was happy to see Polly Holliday when I finally did watch Gremlins last year.
Yeah.
And another face from my childhood, Judge Reinhold plays Gerald Hopkins. He's also known for Fast Times at Ridgemont High, the Beverly Hills Cop series, and what I knew him from was the Santa Claus series, beginning in '94. So he had not obviously gotten there yet.
He reminds me of my brother-in-law in his in his sweaters.
I can see that, actually.
He looks just like Mike.
I can see that. That's really funny.
Me and Lindsay always laugh about it.
He was a villain a little bit in the Santa Claus, but you couldn't hate him.
Him and his Oscar Mayer weenie whistle. I was 4 years old.
And yeah, the association with him and Christmas, I can't break that link now. That's definitely a
he's
done
always
deal.
Christmas from now on.
Always Christmas.
Love him.
And another minor character, Deputy Brent Fry, was played by Jonathan Banks, who was best known for his role in Breaking Bad and then Better Call Saul as well. So he'll look like vaguely familiar and you'll be like, why? And it's because Breaking Bad.
I did that today. I watched it again and I was like, I know
I'm
that
glad
face.
that I could be
I
here
know
telling
that
you
nose.
this.
The nose knows.
But of course, what you're really here to hear about is the voices of the Gremlins.
Absolutely.
And we know that none other than Howie Mandel provided the voice of Gizmo.
Yes.
It just makes me laugh. The thought of it makes me laugh. I don't know why. I didn't realize it because I hadn't seen Gremlins. So when I saw it last year and I saw Howie Mandel, I was like, no way. But sure enough, it is Mr. Mandel.
That's how he made his fortune.
He's known for St. Elsewhere. He voiced Bobby in Bobby's World. And most millennials would know him as the host of Deal or No Deal for a decade, honestly, maybe longer. Most of the Gremlin voiceovers were ad-libs, like repeating snippets of the dialogue that was just performed or reacting to like the environment that Gizmo was in. To this end, Howie Mandel ended up recording Gizmo's lines phonetically for foreign dubs of the movie because they ended up localizing the dialogue. So they would get different in-jokes and different culturally relevant things that he would say to endear him to the locals.
That's perfect.
In these different, dubs of the movie.
That makes so much sense.
For example, I think I read that in the German dub, Gizmo is like muttering like a German drinking song at one point, because it's just like things that only people in that culture, that area would pick up on.
That's fantastic.
Of the film, Howie Mandel said, I kept watching it and I kept thinking, because I didn't know, is this really a kid's movie? It's kind of dark and funny and scary and Christmassy. It's like everything. It's like 4 different genres at once. That's right, Howie. It's pretty dark, though. I'll amend your statement there.
Yeah, he's not wrong, for sure.
He's not. All up in that blender.
This is a brand new rating, a brand new category.
He even said that. That's kind of what he finished his quote off with, but I had already told you all that it created the PG-13 rating, but he mentioned that too. He was like, it was so unique that the MPAA was literally like, this has a new category around it.
Right.
It will be built around this movie. A Pretty Dark alum, Frank Welker, was the voice of Stripe.
Love Frank Welker.
We know that he was a prolific voice actor. He voiced Fred in Scooby-Doo, Megatron in Transformers. I mean, if you know animation, you know Frank Welker. You have heard his voice. We've talked about him a few times.
Even if you don't know it, you know it.
Other Mogwai and Gremlin voices were provided by Peter Cullen, aka Optimus Prime in the Transformers series, Eeyore in Winnie the Pooh, Predator in The Predator, and Monterey Jack in Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers.
Well, how about that?
Fred Newman, also a Mogwai and Gremlin, voiced various characters on Doug, including Skeeter, Porkchop, Mr. Dink, etc. And as soon as I read that, I was like, Porkchop. Yeah, Porkchop is totally a gremlin. Like, it just clicked in my... I was like, yeah, that makes total sense. That voice...
Of course.
Yep, that's true.
Yes.
I believe that. And finally, Michael Winslow, with less Pretty Dark credits, but I felt he should be acknowledged for his contributions to the Mogwai, nonetheless.
All right.
I have a lot more thoughts here on the way that Gremlins as a film depicted violence and greed, gluttony, and again, how some of these choices were satirical for the characteristics and attributes of Western civilization. There's almost an undertone that Western civilization takes too much satisfaction from violence, or is almost desensitized to it. And this was in the 80s, so I can only imagine how that has grown, shifted, and changed today. There's also the classic push and pull between technology, growing, moving forward, inventing new things, and then this like distaste for television and the new generation. You know, there's always that kind of at war, and that happened so frequently in media of the 80s, I feel like, because this was just, technology was just being put into the hands of the general public, especially kids.
I mean,
and that was a huge conversation at the time.
We just talked about this in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. You know, Roald Dahl's whole point of TV
TV's bad for you, Mike TV.
This just continued and continued through the 80s and the 90s. Read a book, get a pizza.
Right. Really, the takeaway for me as I was looking into some of this, and I know we'll get into these conversations more in part 2, is like the Gremlins can kind of be whatever you need them to be. The Gremlins began in concept as scapegoats for accidents or issues that people didn't want to blame on each other or couldn't explain.
Right.
And it's so funny to me that the Gremlins in this film and beyond are still such a projection of what we are criticizing or afraid of. It came full circle in so many ways, and I think there'll be a lot more to like break down about that in part 2. To sum all of this up, I think Zach Galligan said it best in that interview with The Ringer. The Gremlins themselves are creatures that adhere to nothing except their own momentary impulsive desires. They're essentially Freud's version of the id. It's just whatever you want to do, they do. They're anarchists, quite honestly. They don't follow any rules. And I think that not only 10-year-olds, but I think secretly a lot of 40 and 50-year-olds love that idea and live vicariously through the Gremlins.
If it feels good, it is good.
Hedonism.
Exactly. That's the philosophy of the Gremlins.
It's not just the fear that we project onto the Gremlins, but also the satisfaction of full, complete embodiment and self-indulgence.
Absolutely. The land of cocaine. From remember that from Pinocchio series 2 Christmases ago?
Man, Pleasure Island. Yeah, we talked a lot about this then too.
Cocaine.
It's
a whole mythical place that existed in stories and literature of the time, and blend that with the Gremlin philosophy, and bam, dark Norman Rockwell Christmas movie.
I really just love dark Norman Rockwell. I love it. I love the concept. I love the idea. The execution here is a little slapstick for my personal taste. Like, it's not like, oh my God, I love Gremlins, because I'm not really a slapstick kind of gal. But
sure.
I see the merit in the dark Norman Rockwell, and obviously the merit in all of this like existential commentary being placed on these little tiny, unassuming at first creatures.
The little green men. I think if this was made today, it wouldn't quite fly. It'd be like obvious. But at the time,
it was and it wasn't. Like, it was meant to be. They were putting clips of It's a Wonderful Life in the movie. They wanted it to be obvious.
Yeah.
Now it hits it almost too close.
It was ripe for the picking in the 80s. Now it would be way overripe.
Right.
But we appreciate it because it tasted good at the time.
Yep.
And we grew up eating that sweet, sweet fruit.
You said it. So, Darklings, we haven't officially posed the question to you yet because I think we kind of took the answer for granted. But is Gremlins a Christmas movie? We know, and as we said, that it was released in June. So it was a summer blockbuster. But it was originally planned and scheduled to be a Christmas release. And was then rushed into production when Warner Brothers found out that it had no major competition against Paramount's Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom or Columbia's Ghostbusters for that summer movie season. So the only reason that we saw Gremlins in June, and by we, I mean those of you who were alive in 1984 to go to the theater, was because of capitalistic competition. It wasn't because they intended it that way.
So they wanted Steven Spielberg to compete with Steven Spielberg?
They did, yeah. And they had him compete with himself.
How do you do that?
He competed with himself. He sure did. And then they released on the same day as Ghostbusters. So
That's
it's like
freaking Ghostbusters.
It was all
That's
right there
crazy
together.
to me.
It's wild.
No, they should have waited for Christmas. That would have been a way bigger deal.
I think it would have been a bigger movie at Christmas. And it's funny because it was second place at the box office. I'll save some of the reception stuff and I'll bring some of that to the table in our part 2. I try to split it up sometimes. But yeah, I feel like it would have done better at Christmas.
Yeah.
I can't help but think
I cannot. I would be so upset if I went to see this movie in the summertime.
We've talked about something recently that was a holiday movie that came out in the summer or a summer movie that came out in Christmas. Like recently. A lot of them, they kind of go on the opposite cycle. And you and I, you being you, obsessed with a season at a time.
It's upsetting. Can you imagine walking out of the theater and it's not Christmas and 100 degrees outside?
I can.
I'd be so upset.
You're like, yeah, there's snow on the ground in the movie, and then you turn around and...
Maybe that's why people started having Christmas in July celebrations, because so many Christmas movies came out in July.
However you feel about Gremlins or its Christmas status, y'all already know that it gave us one more 90s kid touchstone, as I said before, the Furby. And there was even a Gizmo-themed Furby toy released in 1999.
I want that one.
So where would we be as a generation? Where would we be as a culture without the Furby? I shudder to think.
Long Furby.
I'll leave you with these thoughts. I admit it regularly to all of you. I am human. Sometimes I struggle with my research, especially when I'm dealing with things in life that are tricky, difficult, work stressful. Life's hard. You know, life's real hard for some of us sometimes.
Yes, it is.
Especially lately. And especially when I didn't watch the material as a child, I can have a really hard time convincing my brain that there is dopamine to be found in the research mines.
Sure.
If I can just get there. But it amazes me how every single time I have this argument with myself, even when I least expect it, if I can just convince my executive functioning to commit for long enough to like open a few tabs and read a few paragraphs,
oh yeah, I
will inevitably encounter all kinds of humanity that makes me so glad that I did it. Because imagination, both in folklore and in film, is so deeply human, as we discussed earlier tonight. We are all the same because we are always seeking. We're always looking for something else, another wave to ride or a gremlin to scapegoat, and occasionally finding it. Because the stories that we tell, both ourselves and one another, have a way of keeping us afloat.
Hell yeah.
I hope that you all feel that way when you're listening, because over and over and over again, 80 some odd times now, nearly 90 times, I think the core principle of our show, you know, like about never really being alone, proves true.
Every time.
Each and every time, over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
No matter the dark corner or the nostalgic favorite, that's the theme that always comes back to meet us. In the darkness.
Yeah, I'm always glad. Like, even when you have to really turn that switch on, like full throttle to get something done.
Hyper-focus.
I'm always so glad I did it.
Me too. Like, I feel like I'm always better for it. I always learn some little thing that just makes me appreciate people.
We always learn so much every time.
Or be validated in my hatred of people. You know, it can go both or either way every time. And I think that's great. I really enjoy what we do here together. And I really appreciate that you Darklings are here listening to it.
Yes. I do as well.
So that was a little bit of a jumble of Gremlins Part 1, but I maintain that anything that I've forgotten or left out, we can rectify when we come back into your ears for our Part 2 closer to Christmas.
We'll figure it out.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
Can't lose here.
I'll be heading that up. Any thoughts you have, you just let me know and we'll include it. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing the research. That was a lot of fun. There's no way I could have gotten that done. So.
Absolutely. I think that, a Part 1 movie night can be a lot of facts and information, but we need these building blocks to make sense of the rest of the movie, so it's always fun to do.
Yep. I don't know if it was obvious. I'm not myself tonight. I got some bad news about my mother.
Yeah.
We think she has Parkinson's, maybe. We don't know yet.
So hard.
She's not been herself for a while, so we're figuring that out. And I just got that news literally like an hour before we had to record, so I've been out of sorts this evening, but I think it worked out okay. I think we had a good time.
Sometimes having this to lean on when times are tough is helpful, even if it's just a brief distraction for the brain, which I know a thing or two about. So
something to focus on and just like do it.
Yeah.
So we're gonna keep enjoying ourselves for the holidays and have a great Christmas time as best we can do. Gonna keep burning those candles, gonna keep watching those movies, and can't wait to talk about Gremlins, the movie itself, and all those details in Part 2 next time.
Yes, we're sending well wishes to Mama Mott. Always.
Mama Mott.
Always and forever. And well wishes to all of you, dear Darklings, as you are approaching your holiday season. We say this every year, but we know the holidays are not so joyful for everyone. And
kind of a main theme of this movie.
Exactly. So sometimes the holidays can equal out to horror as well. And you all have been there with me in pretty much real time through a lot of that stuff.
We always seem to have something major happening around the holidays.
Always. Don't plan it that way. It just happens. But
that's what it do.
It's always helpful to know that we're never really alone. And the support that you guys show us and the support that we can show you guys, I just feel like it's invaluable as a millennial in this day and age. So we'll be right here for you, whether your holidays are happy and joyful or a little bit horrific. Either way.
Sometimes you're anticipating the gifts under the tree from Santa Claus and you look forward to opening them. And sometimes you're Santa Claus stuck in the chimney with a broken neck.
You're the bent neck lady.
You're your own bent neck lady on Christmas Eve.
Sometimes you're your own bent neck lady. Mike Flanagan, call us up. We just want to be friends.
We'd love to talk to you.
If you want more of our weirdness, be sure to follow us on social media at That's Pretty Dark Podcast on Instagram, That's Pretty Dark on TikTok.
Yeah.
If you want to get any of your holiday thoughts, I guess holiday related or not, you can always send them to us at that'sprettydarkpodcast@gmail.com. We read every email and appreciate every thought. And if you are in a generous, giving spirit this holiday season, we would absolutely love and appreciate
Christmas gift.
The best gift you could give us is to give us stars or even a review on your podcast platform of choice. That helps us get into so many more Darkling ears. Even today, I was telling Christian, we had a huge explosion in downloads today, and I can't find out where they're coming from. So if you talk about us online or mention us on social media, let us know, because we'd love to know where the new friends are coming from and to greet you appropriately. So not sure what's happening, but I'm not going to complain about it.
We need to know which party favors to give you.
Right.
When you leave.
When you leave. But yeah, thank you all for being here, and happy December, and we're going to keep trucking, and we cannot wait to see you in 2025 also. We've got one more episode for your ears in 2024, which doesn't even seem like a real sentence I can say.
No, it doesn't.
But
it's been a hell of a year, though.
There's only one more pretty dark episode of 2024.
Man.
But we are looking forward to 2025. And yeah, we can't wait to ring in another pretty dark new year.
Thanks for being here, guys. Thanks for listening.
We appreciate you, and you will be hearing from us just as soon as possible.
ASAP.
Remember, keep away from bright lights.
Don't eat after midnight.
And don't get wet. I don't know why we had to end on that one.
I just think getting wet is what we all need to do this holiday season.
Maybe do get wet. How about that?
I think allow for the wetness.
We'll make room for the wetness.
And I mean, look, if I could eat after midnight, I'll be happy. It's like that midnight snack.
That is all between like you and your acid reflux, I guess. Your bad dreams.
I'll have my own bad dreams. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to That's Pretty Dark, written and produced by Christian Baxter Mott and Kaylin Andrews.
Our music is composed by Jonathan Simmons, and our art is provided by Paige Garland at Power Girl Illustration.
Join the collective nostalgia and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at That's Pretty Dark Podcast.
Share your experiences and let us know what shows, films, or villains still haunt you from childhood at that'sprettydarkpodcast@gmail.com. Remember, you're never really alone.
So, until next time, sweet dreams, everyone.